Why did the Philistines attack Israel in 2 Samuel 5, and what was the result? This is the question we seek to answer today as we continue our verse-by-verse study of the book of 2 Samuel on Walking Through the Bible.
The glory of his cross.
Today we're going to be discussing 2 Samuel chapter 5, verses 17 to 25. Before we do that, let's read the passage. If you have a Bible with you, turn to 2 Samuel chapter 5, verse 17. But if you don't have a Bible, don't worry. Just follow along with us on the screen. The version that we'll be reading from is the New King James Version. So 2 Samuel chapter 5, beginning verse 17. Now when the Philistines heard that they had anointed David king over Israel, all the Philistines went up to search for David. And David heard of it and went down to the stronghold. The Philistines also went and deployed themselves in the valley of Rephaim. So David inquired of the Lord, saying, Shall I go up against the Philistines? Will you deliver them into my hand? And the Lord said to David, Go up, for I will doubtless deliver the Philistines into your hand. So David went to Baal-perazim, and David defeated them there. And he said, The Lord has broken through my enemies before me, like a breakthrough of water. Therefore he called the name of that place Baal-perazim. And they left their images there, and David and his men carried them away. Then the Philistines went up once again, and deployed themselves in the valley of Rephaim. Therefore David inquired of the Lord, and he said, You shall not go up, circle around behind them, and come upon them in front of the mulberry trees. And it shall be, when you hear the sound of marching in the tops of the mulberry trees, then you shall advance quickly. For then the Lord will go out before you to strike the camp of the Philistines. And David did so, as the Lord commanded him, and he drove back the Philistines from Geba as far as Gezer. In our last lesson, we had David being anointed king over Israel after the northern tribes that had been loyal to Ishbosheth, Saul's son, made a covenant with David to be their king. David took Jerusalem from the Jebusites and made that his capital instead of Hebron, as Jerusalem had the capability of being fortified against attack and was closer to the northern tribes than Hebron in Judah was. Coming to verse 17, it appears that we have gone back in time a little bit, perhaps to just before, just after David conquered Jerusalem, for the Philistines get word that David has now been made king over all Israel, and they decide to attack. This is the first real mention of the Philistines as actively being engaged with Israel since the battle at Mount Gilboa in 1 Samuel 31 that led to Saul's death. We said back in chapter 2 that it appears that the northern nation of Israel seemingly had, in the intervening 7.5 years, taken their land back from the Philistines that they lost after that battle, but that didn't mean that the Philistines didn't exert influence over them. Recall back to the days of Saul that even though Saul was king, at times the Philistines would exert control in parts of Israel. It is quite possible that parts of Israel were under tribute to the kings of the Philistines during the reign of Ishbosheth and the early reign of David in Hebron. And with Israel weak and divided, the Philistines would have been happy with the situation as long as they got paid, and as long as Israel didn't seem to be too much of a threat. However, with Israel seemingly uniting around a man like David, a man that the Philistines were familiar with, their disposition towards Israel changed, and they decided to attack Israel in the valley of Rephaim. The valley of Rephaim is located south and west of Jerusalem, in between Jerusalem and Bethlehem. It is said that when David heard of what the Philistines were doing, he went to the stronghold. The last stronghold mentioned in this chapter is the one at Mount Zion in the city of David, but that doesn't appear to be what is being referred to here, as it says that David went down to the stronghold. Mount Zion is a hill, and so if David was there, he wouldn't go down to it, and if he was someplace else, he wouldn't go down to it either. This has led some to speculate that what is being talked about here is the stronghold at Adullam, one of the places that David hid from Saul while on the run, located near the valley of Elah to the southwest of the valley of Rephaim. From there, David inquired of the Lord whether he should go up against the Philistines, and the Lord affirmed that he should, for the Lord would deliver the Philistines into his hands. And so David fought against them and repelled them. So quick was the attack that the Philistines had left their idols behind that they had brought, probably thinking that these idols would assure them victory. Of course, these idols were nothing but man-made objects, with the true God of heaven fighting on David's side. However, David didn't utterly defeat the Philistines, allowing them to retreat. For some time later, how much time we're unsure, the Philistines returned to the valley of Rephaim to fight Israel. This time, though, when David inquired of the Lord told David not to go directly against them, but to circle around behind them and attack there. This likely means that for this second attack, David was in a different place than the first attack. For the direction that David will chase the Philistines in this battle was from the south to the north and then west. So if David was to circle on behind the Philistines, he must have been situated here in the north or east, which would make sense as the second battle was later than the first battle. The second battle was different than the first, though, for David didn't just beat the Philistines in the valley of Rephaim. He drove them back to Gezer, which was one of the northern cities of the Philistines. The route that David took should sound familiar to regular viewers of this podcast, for from the valley of Rephaim, David drove them north to Geba, which some versions say is Gibeon, in Benjamin, then west through through the Bethoron Ridge, and back through the Ajalon Valley to the Philistine territory. Defeating the Philistines here wouldn't be David's final defeat over them, but it would be his first as king, and it would further strengthen him as king over Israel moving forward. So David is now king. Jerusalem is the capital, and David has a palace in it. But what of the house of God, the tabernacle? And what of the Ark of the Covenant that had been in Kirjath-jearim for about 100 years by this point? What did David want to do about that situation? We'll discuss that, beginning, the Lord willing, in the next lesson. With that, our time is up for today. The Lord willing, we hope you'll join us for tomorrow's discussion of 2 Samuel chapter 6, verses 1 to 15, as we continue our walk through the Bible, one verse at a time. Thank you for watching today's episode. We hope that you found it edifying and ask that you not only subscribe to our channel and podcast, but that you like and share this episode among your friends, so that the saving gospel of Jesus Christ can go out to the whole world.